bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. In the Lord shall my soul be praised. Let the meek hear and be glad. O magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together.
Father, what is the Orthodox Church's position on gay marriage and homosexuality in general?
Well, homosexual acts are categorically forbidden and against the law of God. There are numerous citations in Holy Scripture and Holy Tradition, both from the Old Testament and the New, that very unambiguously outlaw such actions.
Why? Why are they unacceptable?
Because sexual intimacy is really designed for the confines of marriage. In other words, any kind of sexual activity, whether it's homosexual or heterosexual, is against God's law when it is not within the confines of holy marriage. This is because the intimacy of marriage is in a way to bring about something that resembles the Holy Trinity. If you ever read the service of a marriage in the Orthodox Church, it is from top to bottom full of references to having children, to bearing children. So when a couple comes to the Orthodox Church and they want to be married, it is with the intention that their sexuality, that their intimacy will eventually produce children. Now, how is that a reflection of the Holy Trinity? Well, if you had two people in an exclusive relationship, then they could be just that, very exclusive. They could not love each other with other directed love, with unselfishly. They could be fairly selfish with just two people. When you add a third, and I can certainly attest to this as being a parent myself, you have two people who love each other, and a third, in the sense, any children, that those children become very much an extension of who you are, and it's an outpouring of the two of you's love. And on top of that, it's very hard to be a good parent and to be a selfish parent. So you have three members of this family, and I mean, again, I say three as in however many children that you have, but you have three elements within that family dynamic: a mother, a father, and the offspring, that are able to bring about this other directed love, this unselfishness that flows throughout a family. When you don't have that, when that's not a part of the authentic nature of marriage, then it fails the definition of what marriage is supposed to be to a Christian.
So the intention for procreation almost seems a prerequisite. Why wouldn't adoption fit this bill? What if a homosexual were to adopt children? Why would that still be transgressing God's law?
Yes, it would. It would be a close facsimile, but it would still be an imitation of the Christian family. Because when the homosexual couple, whenever they would have sex with one another, their sexual activity has 0% chance of producing offspring. And so even though they might have invited a third person into that marriage, they are not, through their inherent activity, able to produce any offspring. and they know that from the get-go. Now, there might be couples who they get married and then realize that they can have children, and so they adopt. And of course, that would meet the criteria. But in other words, they don't know that for sure until they get married. I've had couples come to me and want to get married, and they thought that they were, either the man or the woman thought that they were not going to be able to have children, and then lo and behold, they're able to have children. So as long as there is that possibility for God to perform a miracle as He sees fit, then that certainly qualifies as a Christian marriage. But even though two homosexual people would come together in a marriage, so to speak, and want to adopt, even though that's very unselfish in a lot of ways, it's still not true, genuine Christian marriage according to Holy Scripture and Holy Tradition.
What if the homosexual couple decided to not have sexual relations? What if from the very get-go, from the very beginning, they came into this relationship without any intention of sex? Would that still be permissible, in God's law?
Not for a marriage, because a marriage by its definition requires that activity occur within the confines of marriage. I suppose it could be a very strange living relationship where two people who are not married and are not having sex with one another decide to live together and adopt a child. But that still would not be a marriage. It still would not be a marriage according to Christian definition.
Well, the Holy Virgin Mary was with Joseph. They didn't have sexual relations, and apparently they had no intention of having sexual relations. By that definition, wouldn't that sort of say that wasn't a traditional marriage?
It wouldn't be a normal marriage, no.
Okay.
But there are different intentions based on that. They were two people who were very exceptional in the history of humanity. And they did have children to raise. Joseph had children from a previous marriage. And then, of course, they had a child together, our Lord Jesus Christ, whom St. Joseph took to be his own son and raised him in that fashion. But that's definitely a variant of an exception in human history.
Doesn't it seem sort of austere? What if you had two people, two women, two men, authentically love each other? Why can't they be together according to the eyes of God or to the eyes of the church? What's wrong with them being together, with or without sex?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's certainly fine if two people who have deep feelings for one another want to live together, or, for companionship or so forth. But I think when we're talking about a sexual orientation with the intention of having sex with one another, then we're talking about a different kind of relationship altogether. Two people can have a very deep and loving friendship and even live with one another. That's not a problem from the sense of wanting that companionship. But I think what we're talking about is, to be clear, the activity of homosexuality is sinful according to God's law. It is an abomination to God.
So the activity of homosexuality is sinful, but not to be homosexual.
I guess it depends on what we define as to be homosexual. If we define that as someone who engages in that activity, then yes, that would be sinful. If we're talking about someone who has that as a temptation, then it's not everyone is tempted. The temptation does not make us sinners. It is the response to the temptation that makes us a sinner.
Well, response, implies choice. Are homosexuals born homosexuals?
Well, we're all born in a fallen nature. I don't think that today people really have a good grasp of what fallenness really means. When Adam and Eve fell from God's grace in the Garden of Eden, and the Holy Fathers speak about this many times, they corrupted everything. and they corrupted themselves, even down to the level of their DNA. It's the very reason why we have birth defects, why we have, problems that can be inborn within us, why our genetic code can code us for having cancer later, or be more prone to alcoholism or perversion of a sexual nature. So in other words, we couldn't say that, well, it's fine for someone to drink themselves to death because they've been born with a predilection towards alcoholism. It's not okay to act on every inclination that we're born with. So sexuality, because by the same token you could say, well, many people are born with an inclination to have sex with, everyone they see just about. Right. That doesn't make it all right or moral. We are held to a higher standard to be above our genetics, above, our inclinations as Christians.
So even the heterosexual inclination towards unchecked sex, even that's sinful.
Absolutely.
So there's really
anything that is sexual in nature, in other words, seeking out sexual pleasure that is outside of the confines of marriage, whether that's fornication, premarital sex, or adultery, or homosexual acts, all of that is twisting the intent of God in sex and what He gave to humanity as a pleasurable action that adheres a husband and a wife to one another in their bond of marriage. Anything that is outside of that is self-seeking. It's ultimately self-seeking.
What about extramarital relationships? What about people in long-term relationships, or people habitating with each other? They live with each other, they love each other. Why can't they have sex? It's almost like you're saying that it's like within the confines of only within marriage is sexuality permitted.
Correct.
It's
yes.
Only within marriage.
Yes, because love and marriage are different animals.
Well, animals don't get married.
No, they don't. Nor was there a gospel written for them or a law given to them by God. They are not under the same dictates that we are. We were created by God to be in communion with Him, and that requires certain things. One of which is to be above our instincts. Animals work off of their instincts. Now, two people can be in love, but to be in a marriage is a very different thing. Marriage obviously must contain love, but there's a whole host of other decisions, other intentions that are there in a marriage that must be within that context of something that God brings together and joins together in the blessing and presence of the church. When you do something that is outside of that, whether it's with a member of the same sex or a member of the opposite sex, what you're telling God is, I know a better way, I'm not going to follow your way. And that strains our relationship. We didn't invent marriage. God gave marriage to human beings. That's why it says in Genesis that it's God's intention that a man live with his parents until he leaves, and he says, cleaves unto his wife. This is God's intention for us to live. And when we go against it, we are giving in to the nature of the fallen world rather than giving ourselves over to the nature of perfection in God's law.
Now, this is the Orthodox perspective. I know there are a lot of Christian denominations in this country that would disagree with you. Mm-hmm. They would say, well, Jesus was preaching love. He says, thou shalt not judge unless you want to be judged. Why your position? Why not theirs? Why not follow theirs?
Because that is the holy tradition. Because that is the way Christians have acted from the earliest times. Yes, we're not called to judge on the salvation of each other's souls. That we're not called to judge upon. But for instance, we couldn't hold that same sort of mentality with regards to murder. We couldn't walk around and say, well, we just saw this person standing over someone else with a smoking gun, but we can't judge them and think that they might have murdered someone. That would be too judgmental. No, we have to be able to judge actions. That's why we're given God's law to live by, so that we know what actions are pleasing to God and what actions are not.
Okay, so what is a homosexual supposed to do if they're looking for truth, if they're searching for ancient Christianity, true Christianity, if you will, and they come to the Orthodox Church and they hear your stance? What are they supposed to do?
Well, there's only really one choice, and that is that they accept the truth. As you said, if they're seeking the truth, then the truth might be that they have to live a life where they're celibate, where they stay in chastity their whole lives. Just like an alcoholic who is recovering. Once they are in the recovery phase, they have to stay away from all drinks. They can't have one, because if they do, they'll go back, back to the condition they were in. So why should it be any different for someone who has a sexual temptation that is against God's law?
In America, you see a lot of people who call themselves Christians hating homosexuals. The Westboro Baptist Church, for example, they go to funerals, they go to these gay parades, and they put up their signs and say God hates homosexuals. How are Orthodox Christians in general, how are they supposed to treat homosexuals?
Well, we should treat homosexuals as we treat every other person, with great love and compassion, because we're all sinners. Homosexuality is a sin. The church cannot walk around and pretend like it's not. But at the same time, it has to give pastoral care to those people who are afflicted by this. Just as we would treat someone who has, like I said, the affliction of maybe alcoholism or great deals of anger or anxiety or mental disorders and so forth. These people deserve our love and compassion and understanding that their temptations are not the same as ours. Everybody doesn't have the same spiritual tests that the other people have. So we're not to treat them with hatred or malice or anything like that. I think the Christian response to those people who are very anti-Christian and are pursuing an agenda to really dismantle Christianity in our society, we should treat those people with the same amount of love and respect them as people. We don't have to agree with them. We don't have to walk around and say, oh, well, you're okay and I'm okay and so forth. That's not it at all. But we're not called on to show anyone malice or hatred, but to show people forgiveness, to show people the light of Christ, and to understand that people have different struggles.
You've heard of those Christian gay camps, right, where they send the homosexuals out to this sort of camp where they essentially seek to reform the homosexual to a heterosexual orientation. What's the Orthodox stance on that?
It doesn't sound like it's something that probably is very fruitful, because some of these temptations can be very deeply ingrained. I think what would be better would be to explain to people that this might be something that they struggle with their whole life, and that celibacy might be the only real option that they have. We don't have a right to sex. We have the right to be children of God, but we don't have a right to sex.
To the undiscerning mind, it would seem like you're trying to strip people of their happiness. I mean, people seem to be very happy in homosexual relations or with their orientation, heterosexual even. Even people who commit adultery seem to be having a good time. There are television shows glorifying this all over TV. I mean, isn't this basically the church or another religious institution trying to get in the way of a person's happiness?
Trying to kill everybody's joy.
Yeah, trying to kill everyone's joy.
Let me say this. We are not here to pursue happiness. If we want to be Christians, if we want the truth, then we must come to the realization that we are here to work out our salvation. And very often that does not include personal happiness. If we read the lives of the saints, Many of the things they went through were very grueling and unpleasant, dreadful even. It doesn't seem that, and their lives were very pleasing to God. It doesn't seem like they were given a whole lot of earthly happiness. Our point is not that we're trying to be happy in this life. The point is that we're trying to be happy or have the joy of the next life. And so, yes, we're not called to engage in every little thing that we want to do, every little thing that might give us a thrill. We're not called to do that here on earth. So no, the church is not here to pat everyone on their head and tell them, it's okay as long as you're happy. No, the church is here to straighten us out and to show us the path of salvation. And that does not include a prescription for everyone to just do whatever they feel makes them happy or feels good.